Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Master of Fun and Wonder, and of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. Robert Meyer Burnett here with Robservations, episode number 329. Robservations is, of course, the show about something that is coming to you, beaming to you, Robcasting from this, the Robservatory, to all of you imagination connoisseurs that make up the Post-Geek Singularity community. I bid you welcome, and I've been gone for too long. It's nice to be back home. I was in New York, I was in Portland, and now I am back talking to you here in the Robservatory on Robservations, the way it should be. Gilbert and Tallulah, I believe, are inside because of the landscapers being here. So I don't know if they're going to be on the show. And if they are on the show, I'll have to get up and open the garage door so they can get in. But you know what? You'll probably hear if they're going to be around as one day, soon. They can't be gone for very long, right? Well, anyway, it is good to be back with you. I want to thank, first of all, everybody, all the new subscribers and everybody for being kind to my sister, my biological sister, Colleen, who was on the show on Saturday. That was a pretty special show for me. It was great to have her on the show. Pretty exciting. I thought she was quite delightful as an on-screen presence, to be honest. And apparently a lot of you did too. So that was great to have her. I want to thank her. And I also want to thank Dr. Michael Schertz, one of my oldest friends in the world, for also agreeing to appear on the show. He hates that, even though he lectures publicly to people all the time, he doesn't like being on camera. So it was great to have him on. It was great. His hospitality was wonderful, him and his wife, Lori. And we busted ass doing new classes for the Crisis Medicine Tactical Casualty Care online lecture series that I've been directing and producing and editing for over 2.5 years now. I've been involved with 2.5 years with them, and I think it's great. And check it out if you're interested. You can go to Crisis Medicine. I think it's Crisis Dash. Just type in Crisis Medicine. You'll get there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, yes, Han Solo is coming back. I'm very excited. I talked a little bit about this on the show. We talked about it on John Campia's show. But yes, I was, as we say, Ghibli about his return. I couldn't be more excited. So, but you know what I'm not excited about? Now, you know that I am the Chancellor of Cheerfulness, but I have a problem, and I've had an ongoing problem with modern Star Trek since 2009. And, I've talked about it ad infinitum, whatever that means. I've gone on and on and on and on and on. You've heard me go on and on and on about it, and I'm going to go on and on about it a little bit more today. Now, I have to say, full disclosure, I somewhat enjoyed, I liked what I saw at the beginning of Star Trek Picard. But as you know from the video that I did before the show came out, talking about what I perceived to be the fundamental flaw with Star Trek Picard is of course what they've done to the Federation. The idea that with Star Trek, humanity basically had itself squared away. And by being squared away, then we could go out and we could be free to interact with, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man or no one has gone before. And what allowed us to do that was the fact that we had pretty much humanity had squared itself away back on Earth. And we would deal with all manner of social commentary, by using what we found out there to reflect back upon us. Now, one of the things, after watching the second episode of Picard, I found myself really offended. Offended is the right word. I was offended by pretty much everything in that episode. And I know it was mostly an episode about talking, and it was exposition, and not a whole lot went on. But I really did not like, I really don't like the way the Federation is being portrayed, or any of these things are being portrayed, because I feel like what we're seeing is an amalgamation of all of the science fiction that's appeared on television over the last 20 years that isn't Star Trek. Now, we could talk Battlestar Galactica, we could talk Firefly, we could talk any number of things. And of course, there's a lot of Blade Runner in this it's as if that everybody who's working on this show has the only science fiction in their lexicon is in fact movies and television. Now I know Michael Chabon has won prestigious awards like the Hugo and Nebula for his work, and I can understand that, but that doesn't necessarily mean he has a wide working breadth of knowledge of canonical science fiction. I mean, what we would say are some of the best. I mean, I'm sure he does. Most writers are avid readers as well. But I don't feel that we are getting the show that Picard is unwrapping itself, that it's revealing itself to be, seems what I would call very dunderheaded. And I think a lot of it, if I had to place the blame on anyone, I would place the blame on Akiva Goldsman, if only judging from his fantasy output in the past, the things that we've seen from him. And I feel that everything has been really dumbed down. And whenever they need magical technology, they have magical technology. But this idea that they're going to, first of all, that Romulans strenuously object to AI or synthetic life. First of all, as somebody tweeted out a scene from the 3rd season of Next Generation, The Defector, where Admiral Jarok is talking to Data, a Romulan admiral, and he says, boy, there's a lot of Romulan cyberneticists who would like to get close to you, which contradicts what they're saying in Star Trek Picard. And you have the Tal Shiar have their own Tal Shiar within them. And all of these things they just keep piling these ideas on top of other ideas, and they seem to me to be fairly rudimentary and not really thought out. Because if you have a society that relies on modern technology, computer technology, and you have spaceships that run through controlled singularities, the way that the Romulan Deredex class does, it would seem sort of silly that you would have an aversion to AI or synthetic life forms when most of your future is run by computers. And this has never been established in Star Trek lore, and that's okay. I mean, they can always add things to the lore. That's what's fun about all of the Star Trek shows as they progress. But it seems to me that Star Trek Picard is piling one bad idea on top of another in the service of trying to be relevant to the modern age. But that's what allegory is. And Star Trek Picard isn't necessarily allegory. It's just full-on didactic. We're going to make the Federation and the world of Star Trek seem as recognizable to you today, and understanding whether it's Trump, whether it's Brexit, whatever you want to talk about, racism, xenophobia, everything that's happening today is being presented in the most ham-fisted way on Star Trek. Now, that's not to say that these kinds of things have not been presented in a ham-fisted way before. I'm looking at you, let that be your last battlefield from the 3rd season of the original series. I get all that. But it's so, in doing so, Star Trek is inherently, at its very core, it has to have optimism in it. Now, people will throw back at me, but Rob, what about the Dominion War? And what about everything that happened during the Dominion War? And things like in The Pale Moonlight, which has one of the darkest episodes, I think, of Star Trek. And I don't mean dark from a cinematography standpoint. I mean dark in the sense that a murder was condoned to bring the Romulans into the war. That was some pretty dark stuff. And at the end of the day, Sisko says, I can live with it. I can live with it. That's pretty dark stuff. But at the end of the day, if you look at the Klingons and the Federation and how they were able to team up and overcome their differences, and even after their peace was shattered by the Dominion, and all of these things went on, there still was an air of positivity even during the height of the Dominion War, because the characters were essentially presented as being good people. And I think that even on the frontier, on Deep Space Nine, there was still that recognizable Star Trek optimism. But in this show, I don't see any of that. I mean, they're subverting everything we know, and I get it. But before I get deeper into it, I'd like to read a few articles, some interesting articles that I've come across that I wanted to read, and I think that they're important to address. And this first article was on Screen Rant a couple of days ago, and it was on February 1st, yeah, so it was 2 days ago, and I wanted to share it with you. So let's check it out. Star Trek Picard's Romulan retcon, why the villains hate androids. Star Trek Picard has retconned the Romulans so that they bear an ancient hatred of androids and all artificial life. The new CBS All Access series starring Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard has already proven itself to be primarily concerned with the role of synthetic life forms in the Alpha Quadrant. The former Starfleet admiral's restless retirement was upended by the arrival of a woman named Daj Asha. Begging for his help, Picard soon discovered Daj is a human-like artificial being who is the daughter of the late Commander Data. Is she? We know she has a positronic brain, but I don't really quite understand what it all means yet. I don't know. I'm not convinced necessarily the writing staff does either. The former Starfleet admiral's restless retirement was upended by the arrival of a woman named Daj, the daughter of late Data. Sadly, Picard failed to protect Daj from being assassinated by the series' Romulan villains, who are part of a heretofore unheard-of cabal of the Tal Shiar called the Zotvash. Zotvash. Because, okay, the Romulans are the oldest enemy of the United Federation of Planets, and they're among the Star Trek franchise's original alien antagonists, going back to their first appearance in the Star Trek, the original series episode Balance of Terror in its first season. The Klingons and the Romulans were both introduced in Star Trek's first season. The Romulans, obviously, in Balance of Terror, which is one of the finest Star Trek episodes of all. And then, of course, the Klingons were introduced in Errand of Mercy. Revealed to be a more sinister offshoot of the Vulcans and sharing their distinctive pointy ears, the Romulans have plagued Starfleet in every Star Trek series and many of the movies as well, especially Star Trek Nemesis. Meanwhile, the Romulan secret police, the Tal Shiar, was first mentioned in Star Trek The Next Generation, but was explored more fully on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. In Star Trek Picard, the Romulans have taken on a greater significance since the Romulan supernova, first mentioned in J.J. Abrams' 2009 Star Trek movie, plays a key role in Picard's backstory. As ruthless and treacherous as the Romulans are, however, the villainous race hasn't been portrayed as haters of artificial life forms until Star Trek Picard. In Star Trek Picard's second episode, Maps and Legends, Jean-Luc begins investigating the history of Daj and why she was targeted by a Romulan death squad. Luckily, his two Romulan caretakers of the Chateau Picard vineyard, Laris and Zaban, are former members of the Tal Shiar and were able to shed some light on Daj's assassins. As Laris explained, the evidence points to Daj's killers being members of the Zotvash, an older and even more dangerous version of the Tal Shiar that bears an unassuageable hatred of all artificial life forms. Hence they mark Daj and her twin sister Soji, the most advanced synthetic beings known, for termination. Laris further clarified, asking Picard and the audience if we've ever noticed that the Romulans never utilized cybernetics, androids, or AI, and that even their computers are only useful for numerical functions. Well, that's absurd. I mean, here when you start to think about their computers are only used for numerical functions. I mean, all of this kind of thinking, it's like, all right, let's just stop and think. Are our computers? We don't have AI yet, and we don't have synthetic life forms. And are our computers only used for numerical functions? I'm talking to you because of my computer. I would imagine that stellar navigation would be greatly enhanced or simplified using computers. What about storing information? history, for instance, perhaps star charts. I mean, it's just when you say things like that, when the writers write this kind of stuff, it drives me. It's so irksome because you're like, come on, man. I mean, again, I've always talked on this show about how science fiction is it's a literary genre. And what science fiction does best is it extrapolates our world today, and when you're watching, I guess, or listening or reading about future civilizations or strange worlds, or whether if you're reading Ursula Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness, or you're reading Hyperion, or you're reading Dune or Childhood's End, or Mission of Gravity, The Demolished Man, pick your favorite science fiction novels. Even going back into the early days of science fiction, they understood where computers and artificial intelligence would be in the future. And it's going to be ubiquitous. Our own world is proving that right now. So this idea that the Romulans shun any kind of AI is just patently absurd. So when they do something like this, when they're trying to present this idea to me, especially when you've actually seen a Romulan talking to Data in a very good third season Next Generation episode about Romulan cyberneticists, it makes very little sense. It makes very little sense. And when I see this, the same way it makes very little sense that you would see a Starfleet admiral treat Jean-Luc Picard with such disdain. And of course, I guess the highest levels of Starfleet have been infiltrated by Romulans or whatever is going on. I mean, all of these things just add up to one big, I don't know, why bother? Okay, Captain Picard has this strange affinity for Data, which he didn't really exhibit. He liked Data, of course, he valued Data, but it wasn't like Data was his best friend in the world. If you watch Star Trek The Next Generation, there were times when Captain Picard barely tolerated Data. Even in Encounter at Farpoint. And it's all very strange because, once again, I think the writers of Star Trek Picard are shoehorning all of this stuff into the show because they want to tell. Look, I find it very interesting that a new Star Trek show is basically a sequel to about 20 other episodes of various series of Star Trek. Apparently the big bad in this episode is Bruce Maddox, who was somebody that we met in, of course, Melinda Snodgrass's brilliant Season 2 Next Generation episode, Measure of a Man, who wanted to take Data and study him. And as Next Generation went on, we learned that Data had ongoing correspondence with Bruce Maddox. Now, I think it's fine that you have Bruce Maddox. I think it's an interesting callback to the original series. I hope at some point Melinda Snodgrass gets credited, and also I would hope that the writers are reading at least one Star Trek novelist, the great David Mack. He doesn't just write Star Trek novels. You should read all of his Dark Arts books. The third one is coming out soon. David Mack wrote a trilogy of novels about Dr. Soong's androids. I don't know if the whole series is called The Cold Equations, but certainly the first book is. And obviously, as we know, and I find this strange, there's been no mention of Lore. Obviously, there was Data, but there was also his evil counterpart, Lore. We talked about before, but there was no mention of Lore. There was no mention of Dr. Soong's other androids, including Data's mom. Maybe that'll come up later. But again, okay. But it just seems to me that when I'm watching the show, and I thought the first episode had promise, but this second episode was so full of things that I'm like, no one in the Star Trek universe that we've ever met would behave this way. An admiral would not be treating, since when did Jean-Luc Picard become, in Starfleet history, some kind of crotchety old guy that should be shunned? And this idea where literally that there were members of the United Federation of Planets that agreed or they now say that, sure, let the Romulans die. Really? I mean, after the Dominion War and after Nemesis, let the Romulans die. Let them all die out. Doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to me. And that is not the future Star Trek that I grew up watching, where genocide would be normalized or even considered. One of the great things about the Star Trek, as when the Romulans were introduced, they are not shown as being necessarily the scheming, conniving, evil people. They're people that they are duty bound by their way of life, their empire, their praetor, or whatever you want to call it. They're duty bound. That's what they do. They probe weakness, and part of their society is if they find weakness, they will exploit weakness to expand their empire. That's what Balance of Terror was all about. They're testing Federation defenses. They've found Federation defenses to be fairly lacking, and when that Romulan bird of prey returns back to the Empire, they are going to announce, they will say, look, the Federation is weak. We should use this opportunity to once again expand our borders. That's why it's so difficult. That's why it's so imperative, actually, that Kirk and Spock and the Enterprise crew must stop this from happening. And they do. And at the end, over the course of this episode, the Romulan commander, played by Mark Leonard, and of course, James T. Kirk, Shatner's Kirk, they develop a respect for one another. It's not even a grudging respect. They're both really good at their jobs. And at the end, what does the Romulan commander say? In another reality, I could have called you friend, to Kirk. And, I think that there's a lot of nuance and subtlety there. It's not just, they're not mustache twirling villains when they show up in the Next Generation in the last episode of the first season, the Neutral Zone. They kind of are. And I don't necessarily, the Romulans were a lot more one note in Next Generation. There was a lot of scheming going on. They were behind the Klingon Civil War and Redemption Part 1 and 2. There's Sela and all this craziness that went on. But so it's not unusual where the Romulans are in Picard, that they've lost their home world, they're infiltrating the galaxy. I get all of this, but anyway, I'm not digging it, people. I'm not digging it. I'm not digging, and I understand, I get that they've got the Borg, they've got the Romulans. I don't know if they're going to have any Klingons in this, but it's there. This is space soap opera of the highest order. And none of it to me makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. We'll see where it goes. The magic technology they have on display, so far, I'm not impressed. And specifically, when you have a Federation admiral or Starfleet admiral talking about that letting the Romulans die. I know we saw this. Actually, I'll get to this. There's another article I want to read too, but let me finish this one. After all, many Romulans encountered Commander Data on Star Trek The Next Generation, and they never showed any particular animosity toward the android. In fact, Data joined Picard on an undercover mission to Romulus to find Ambassador Spock in the Unification two-parter, and they didn't display overt hatred or intolerance toward the maniacal or mechanical Starfleet officer. However, Laris is also referring to a particular sect of Romulans in the Zhat Vash, and their existence was founded upon a pure hatred of synthetics that eclipses the general Romulan population's mistrust. Well, why? Was there a synthetic uprising on Romulus? Again, all of this to me smacks of Battlestar Galactica. It really is. And a lot of this is taken from Galactica or Blade Runner or any number of other recent Ex Machina. These are all things that I get it. I understand where they come from. But anyway. The details of why the Zhat Vash despise artificial beings so much aren't yet clear, but it may have something to do with the Borg and the fact that the Romulans possess a derelict Borg cube in the Beta Quadrant. Designated the Romulan Reclamation Project, it's surely no coincidence that Soji is working undercover as a cyberneticist reclaiming Borg technology for the Romulans. It's possible that the Romulans' history with the Borg goes back further than anyone realizes, and the Zhat Vash's hatred of synthetics comes from surviving a cataclysmic past encounter with the Borg. But even that wouldn't make any sense because the Borg they assimilate actual life forms. They assimilate them, they possess them, they make them part of the collective. Those people are victims. The Borg are victims. And to hate to hate a victim of essentially, I can't imagine something more traumatic. Essentially, they are raped and possessed by the Borg collective. I can't imagine a more horrible fate than becoming a Borg. And you would think that people would be more sympathetic. There have been many Romulans that have been assimilated as well. So I don't think that the Borg, they're not synthetic life forms. I mean, maybe they came from their some evil race created this technology, but we don't know. We don't know. I've always tended to want to believe that the Borg was a mistake. It was technology run amok that overwhelmed the people that created it, and the Borg collective was born out of it's as a cautionary tale to what technology not properly considered would become. So maybe they have, but since Star Trek Picard revolves around the future of artificial life forms in the Federation, the Romulans' newly revealed hatred of synthetics makes sense to establish them as more villainous than ever. I mean, I guess, I don't know if I buy that. I really don't know. I think that all of this, I know they're setting up racial prejudice, but I can't help but think that you go back to Melinda Snodgrass's episode, Measure of a Man, and then later things like Data's Day, and episodes that dealt with Data as a human being, as a person. When Picard says you want to know, we're supposed to seek out new life and new civilizations, well, there it sits. We already covered this material, and it was covered eloquently. And I just feel like when I'm watching, and by the way, I felt the same way when I watched First Contact back in 1996. I felt that, haven't we dealt with the Borg already? And artificial life, we've already gone through these things. And I understand there is this, in our culture lately, I felt the same way in Watchmen. Damon Lindelof had Dr. Manhattan literally create a slave race of white people to live on Europa, to live a blissful existence, and all they were to do was serve. Now, I get it. I get that we live in this politically correct culture where there's a lot of people working out their issues about these things in very strange ways. And hey, let's create, it's very easy to create, whether it's a metaphor for slaves, whether it's a metaphor for the Holocaust, whatever it's a metaphor for, it'll be revealed as we watch the remaining 8 episodes of Picard. I just think the whole thing is sort of odd and misguided, and it reduces everybody to pretty much being dumb. I guess that's how I feel about it. I feel like all of the problems that we've seen so far in Picard, I mean, the first episode I was willing to go with. I'm like, okay, I really enjoy this. I thought I enjoyed it, but as we moved into the second episode, as I was watching along, I'm like, I don't like this at all, because basically it's subverting the entire idea of Star Trek. There's no optimism to be found anywhere here. And I know maybe Picard's going to save the day, but yes, we have yet to meet his opiate addicted former compatriot. I guess we met her last night, or on Thursday night, but we're going to get more of these. It all feels very un-Star Trek to me. And I understand it depends where you're coming from and when you came into Star Trek and what you want out of it. But I just feel that these writers are not going back to some of the great literary concepts. There's some really heady material in science fiction, and everything that we're seeing is the most dumbed down, rudimentary version of science fiction. And, Blade Runner had a more sophisticated take. Now we know that Daj, hey, she had implanted memories because she's not real. I mean, where do we see that before? Did you get your precious photos? I mean, it's how many times are we going to go back to this well? And if you want to do that, you've got to be better than what's come before. You've got to be better than Blade Runner, and you have to be better than Blade Runner 2049, and you have to be better than Galactica or Ex Machina or any number of things that have dealt with these very issues, all the way back to 1927, Fritz Lang and Metropolis. Metropolis did a pretty good job of dealing with artificial life, and that was a silent movie. still one of the great giants of science fiction cinema. And if you haven't seen Metropolis, shame on you. What are you waiting for? But I don't know. I mean, I'm waiting for this. I'm waiting for Star Trek to feel like Star Trek. I've been waiting for 10 years. I mean, I guess it's like waiting for Godot. I'm going to be waiting forever. But I really feel like the writing staff of this show, and you know what, I'm not going to blame Michael Chabon. I'm not even going to blame Alex Kurtzman. I think more, this is more on the shoulders of Akiva Goldsman, because, hey, he already dealt with these kinds of things in I, Robot. Another movie. I mean, not only do they name check Isaac Asimov in this episode, where do you think that came from? Seeing that Akiva Goldsman's already worked on a previous iteration of a movie, of a book, of a series that Asimov himself wrote about this very thing. And I feel like, why didn't he learn anything from that? But again, it's just, it's monumentally frustrating to me. That's all I can say. I have more to say, but let's see what you guys are saying first. And I know people are speaking. People wrote in that I haven't dealt with. Paul Gilmore sent in a tip yesterday and said, it was awesome seeing your sister yesterday. She's much better looking than you. Well, that's true. And she should be. Sisters should always be better looking than their brothers. That's what I think. Of course, maybe that makes me sexist. Nolan Dykstra sent in a tip and said, are you a fan of Stargate? After finally watching the complete series of SG-1, I've concluded that I'm a bigger fan of the franchise than that of Trek. Stargate, particularly SG-1 and Universe, feel like a single epic narrative with far less than Star Trek. With far less filler than Star Trek, in my humble opinion. Thoughts? I have told everybody I've seen the Stargate movie, which I greatly enjoyed. I've never seen an episode of Stargate. Not a one. It was on TV, not because I wouldn't watch it, I would, but it was on TV when I was mostly working and just wasn't watching a lot of television, so I never caught up with it. But everybody there's a lot of people that love Stargate, and maybe I will, maybe I'll start. Willow Yang is here. Willow Yang says, by the way, I'm going to read something that Willow sent in when I was gone, when I had left, but it's worth reading. Willow Yang says, I've thrown out my back and I'm having trouble moving right now. Did you actually carry a sign saying justice for Han when you went out to watch Hobbs and Shaw? And when will you have Sung Kang in the studio? Well, as far as having Sung Kang in the studio, I don't have Sung Kang, but I have the next best thing. I have my displate of Han. This is it's got a refrigerator magnet. Now this is not a licensed property. There's a company called Displate, and they make these like metal posters, and they did one of these characters with their cars, and I was just delighted a couple of years ago when I first was made aware of them by Cliff Stevenson, my boy Cliff, Geek Santa as we like to call him. He got me my first displates of Star Trek the Motion Picture and Mad Max Fury Road a number of years back. That's how I became familiar with them, and then I found that displate of Sun Kang. It's part of a series they did of heroes with their cars. So I would love to have Sung Kang in the studio. I think he will probably know who I was only because I've tweeted. I used to tweet him and Ryan Johnson all the time. And I think, as John Campy pointed out to me today, it was me and Jen Yamato who might have. I'd like to think that I was the first person to send out, to tweet hashtag Justice for Han. It might have been Jen Yamato, but certainly the two of us began the Justice for Han movement. I will take full credit for that, Willow. But I would love to, and I have to tell you, I own Hobbs and Shaw against my better judgment. I did not take a sign out when to the theater that said Justice for Han, but I do take responsibility. I think Jen Yamato and I were, as soon as I only mentioned it on the Campia show months back, I did say that Han was coming back. As soon as Justin Lin was hired to direct F9 or Fast, the F9, the Fast Saga, whatever if that's what they're going to call the movie, if that's the true title, I knew as soon as Justin Lin was hired, they were going to bring Sung Kang back. Because as many people don't know, or maybe you do know, the character of Han did not originate in the Fast franchise. The character of Han originated in in a Better Luck Tomorrow, which was one of Justin Lin's. I think he made it before he made Shopping for Fangs, but I'm not sure. But Sun Kang played Han in Better Luck Tomorrow. So it's kind of strange and delightful that he brought over a character that he'd created for another franchise, and they were able to put him in Tokyo Drift, or as I like to say, The Drift, which was great. Anonymous tipped $1 and says, have you ever been slapped in the face by a beautiful woman? Yes, I have been slapped in the face by a beautiful woman. I've actually been kicked in the balls by a beautiful woman too. It goes with the territory. It's a professional hazard. What can you do? I did not slap back though. Ray Valero sent in a super chat and said, great to have you back, Rob. Well, it's great to be back, Ray. I missed you guys. I missed talking on the internet. I got a lot of good work done. A lot of interesting stuff happened. So I was very excited to be back here on the air. It's tiresome traveling when you're not at home and you have to. Every day I had something to do. I'd either shoot interviews with somebody or go to host a screening or compete in the Schmodown or shoot crisis medicine on set. And it was a busy time. Rosetta Allen says, you're awesomely humble and down to earth. Well, thank you, Rosetta Allen. That's very nice of you to say. I would hope I am down to earth, literally. But yeah, I mean, look, in terms of everybody has an ego, and I don't mind people who have healthy egos or healthy self-image, because in order to do, like, you'd have to get on camera and talk. And I admire, like, one of the great things about coming home was I was catching up on, I got to watch some Critical Drinker, who I love the Critical Drinker. I think the Critical Drinker is one of my favorite YouTubers. I don't know if you know him, but he frequently does reviews of whether it's Doctor Who or Star Trek or other movies. And Dave Cullen is a guy that I really enjoy. I was watching Dave Cullen, his show, and then of course a lot of the other, like Gary Beekler, Nerdrotic, and of course Doomcock and Midnight's Edge. I mean, there's a lot of people. Katowski, is that how I pronounce it? The guys at Trek Yards. So there's a lot of YouTubers I like, and I would hope that my vibe is down to earth and humble. I appreciate you saying that, but there's still an element of ego to get on and talk. But I don't think that's a problem. If you want to make movies, you have to have a certain healthy self-image, because otherwise, you'd curl up into a ball every day and not be able to accomplish anything. The new channel says, more about Duel of the Fates. Is the script online? Well, for those of you who haven't been paying attention or didn't know, yeah, I was the first person to break the Duel of the Fates script. I will say that it's not online. I have not given the script to anyone. I have not, and nor will I. And I did not put it on Reddit. I will never release it at all, even though people are asking me. I won't do it. As far as I know, I heard it was on Reddit and then it was quickly pulled down. I'm not sure. I do want to do a version of my version of the script incorporating all of the production artwork into it, though. I think I'm going to do that. But again, I can't give it out. I mean, it was given to me in confidence. It was given to me by, let's just say, a friend, and it was fun to cover. And beyond that, I just can't give it out. People are trying to bribe me. It's great. All these people have been sending me all kinds of things. But in this case, I can't let it out. I just can't. I can't do it. So I don't know. I have nothing more to really say about it. There's production artwork that hasn't been released. I can tell you that. And it is, and I can't be the one to release it. It's one thing to talk about a screenplay. You can talk about anything you want. But when you start releasing, like, I don't own the Duel of the Fates script. I can talk about it. It exists. But if I were to give it out, what I'm then doing is trafficking in stolen property. And the same is true of artwork. Like, if somebody else tweets it or something, I'll retweet it. But it never got made. For me, the Duel of the Fates script is an interesting artifact, and it's unfortunate that it didn't get made. And I really enjoyed the production art. I enjoyed the direction the movie was shaping up into being what it was. And it's too bad we didn't get it, because I think it was better than The Rise of Skywalker. I really do. But unfortunately, it was not meant to be. Otaku Senpai says, why do they keep saying synthetics and not androids? I don't know. Like, the funny thing is, to me, we don't even know, like, I guess with Bruce Maddox, we'll know that they're Sung androids, but synthetics, like, to me, again, part of what I don't like about this show is one of the central questions that we've seen in movies like Blade Runner, or like in the Battlestar Galactica, the modern, the David Icke, Ron Moore version of Battlestar Galactica. I've always thought that the idea behind these artificial people, synthetics, even the androids in Alien, like Bishop, I prefer the term artificial person, even that, it's always sort of like the replicants in Blade Runner were, even though they were manufactured, they still were manufactured out of human parts. Somebody would grow eyes, somebody would grow internal organs, and they were put together. So they truly were artificial people, but were they made out of synthetic material, or were you 3D printing an actual eye using human DNA of some kind? I mean, you never really knew. But the question with Blade Runner was, when you make an artificial person or a synthetic or whatever you want to call it, do those people have souls? And I think the whole point of something like Blade Runner is that they did. You know, just because they were manufactured did not mean that they were not imbued with a human soul or a human spirit or what have you. And at the end of the movie, when Roy Batty spares Rick Deckard's life, you realize that there was emotion, there was compassion and empathy there, and that these artificial people that were bred to serve, whether they were on a kick murder squad, whether they were bred to be basically sex slaves or workers or whatever, they could feel, they were empathetic. And I never really understood with Battlestar Galactica, when you saw the Centurions, of course, the toasters, I got that. But once a Cylon can procreate with a human being, once you've gone that far in terms of, I mean, you know how close a human being would have to be with a Cylon to be able to have reproduction work? I mean, it's insanity. But once that can happen, are they machines anymore? And I thought Galactica was really, it got into some really interesting territory, monotheistic versus polytheistic religions. The human beings obviously were polytheists, whereas the Cylons believed in the one true God. All of that was very interesting. And although I don't think they ever really got a handle on answering all of these questions definitively. So if Bruce Maddox has finally made synthetics, and those synthetics were clearly the slave race that Picard himself warned about in Measure of a Man. The conversation that he had with Guinan about creating a slave race in that second season episode, which, by the way, let me just point out, if you get the Blu-ray of the second season of Star Trek The Next Generation, the extended version of Measure of a Man is on there, and it's 13 minutes longer, and in light of Star Trek Picard, it's become more important than ever. And I don't know, I know they did a Picard, they released a Picard disc before the series. I would hope they would have put the extended version of Measure of a Man on there. But I don't know why they're saying synthetics. I don't know. Timbula the Spider Monkey says, so the Federation can survive the wars with the Borg, the Klingons, the Romulans, and the Dominion, but an attack from human-made synths turns them into xenophobic, hate-fueled group of isolationists. You know what? I got to put my glasses on. Sorry. It just doesn't make sense, and that's the major problem. Well, Tim, you absolutely nailed what I have this amazing problem with Star Trek Picard, in that it doesn't make sense. None of this stuff, it's like it hasn't been thought out. It's TV writers who don't know their science fiction. And there's so many questions that arise. that I don't think they've really thought through. I mean, we'll see where it all goes, but you know, they're reclaiming former Borg drones. I guess we'll find out what's happening with those Borg drones when we meet Hugh and Seven of Nine and all that, but I don't know. Roberto Suarez, the great Roberto Suarez, is here. Now, I have to say, one of my highlights to Portland, Oregon was be able to sit down and hang out with Roberto, and he very kindly bought Mike and I drinks, copious amounts of drinks, and he picked the place, this delightful whiskey bar, and I had a great time meeting him. He's definitely, Roberto and I, we definitely park our shuttlecrafts in the same garage, the same shuttle bay. He was a terrific guy, and it was great to meet him. Roberto sends in a tip and says, classic Trek may be old, but it has never felt dated. New Trek feels dated from the start. It will not stand the test of time. We talked a little bit about this when we met. I think you're absolutely right. I think Picard already feels dated. Even the concepts that it's dealing with feel like they're from other places. And it was, I thought, the episode Measure of a Man dealt with, I mean, I know the whole thing about the trial was a little goofy, and Riker and Picard and being on opposite ends of the conversation, having to do their duty was a little odd, but they dealt with artificial life a number of times. What are the comps, the something comps on one of the Next Generation episodes. Why am I drawing a blank on it? But they dealt with it there. They dealt with nanotech life. They dealt with holographic life forms in Deep Space Nine. I mean, they already dealt with these kinds of things and in a more interesting fashion. And I feel like we're going to find out that, okay, maybe the synths were hacked or whatever. But I just feel like the ideas that are being presented in Star Trek Picard are again, my problem with modern Star Trek is whether it was the AI what's their obsession with AI, on Discovery, evil AI on Discovery. Now there's evil AIs or synths on Picard. It's like, come on, man. Don't you have any other science fiction concepts that you can introduce? And these concepts seem like they're borrowed from Galactica. They're borrowed from Metropolis. It just seems like it's so unimaginative right now. But I feel you, Roberto. I think you're right about that. I think it does feel dated. Bunyan Snipe sent in a super chat. I would love to see you have a chat with Red Letter Media's Mike Stalasa and Rich Evans about Trek. I love those guys. As a matter of fact, I watched a Red Letter Media video. I've loved them since their Generations review. Mike is I don't think it's Stalasa. I think it's still Claw. Is it? However you pronounce his last name. I love Mike. I love Red Letter Media. I love what they do. And I feel like me, they love Star Trek. Mike is a huge Star Trek fan with an encyclopedic knowledge of Trek, and I think he kind of feels the same way that I do. I mean, I would go back with Mike all the way back to Generations and say that since Next Generation was over and since Generations, Star Trek has been sort of ailing, I guess. Stub McShave says, I kind of like the first episode, was bored beyond belief with the second episode. It felt like a bad soap opera, and I couldn't wait for it to end. I am with you, man. It was not good. It was not good, and what we saw was like, I felt like I was reading. This is the kind of science fiction I might have written myself in like the 7th grade. If I was going to write a Star Trek novel, I would have written this novel thinking I was being all heady and important, but I didn't like it. Journey's End sent a $5 super chat. Have you heard rumors that Seth MacFarlane with NBC is meeting with CBS trying to buy Star Trek? Sounds too good to be true, but I hope it's true. I think it's way too good to be true. I think, why would Seth MacFarlane do that when he has his own? They're not going to sell Star Trek. Star Trek has been around. It's been a crown jewel in the Paramount Viacom crown for a long time. And they're not going to, why would they do that? Star Trek is still it's a very, very lucrative franchise, and you're not going to sell all of the Star Trek shows to Seth MacFarlane, but I have heard about it. Indeed, I have. Otaku Senpai sent another super chat saying, DS9 founder genocide via Section 31, Section 31 Federation, how to address. Well, again, We dealt with the idea of genocide against the Borg in iBorg, and we dealt with genocide against the founders in Deep Space Nine, and they were both avoided. And I think we dealt with that monstrous. We dealt with that. It was monstrous in all cases. The idea that you would wipe out, especially in terms of the Borg, that everybody is a victim. All the Borgs are victims. There's obviously, we saw the Borg Queen, which didn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense, but still, it would be horrible to think that you would just exterminate the Borg, because they are victims, and we have seen that Borg can be reclaimed all the way back into Best of Both Worlds Part 2. That's why in Star Trek First Contact, the way they just killed certain Enterprise officers that were assimilated, I was like, why would you allow this to happen? We saw that if you could be reclaimed, why would you let your crew die like that? John Harrison. Is that supposed to be funny, John? Because it is pretty funny. Thanks for sending in a super chat. Hi, Rob. Have you asked Mr. Campy if he likes Picard, and your new hashtag should be Han Lives? You know what? I think it's a good hashtag. Justice is served, I was going with, but I like Han Lives. I think that is great. I haven't asked John if he likes Picard. I think he probably does. I think he does. So, ladies and gentlemen, I missed this letter from the great Willow Yang when I was gone. But I wanted to read this because it's about Reginald Barclay and the Next Generation. Dear Rob, I know that you're taking hiatus at the moment, so I don't expect my letters to be read on air, but I do hope that Mike will continue updating the website. And Mike says, I am, Willow. I'm sending over my thoughts on Star Trek The Next Generation episodes Hollow Pursuit and Galaxy's Child, both of which explore the problems of recreating real-life people in holodeck simulations. Hollow Pursuits introduced the character of Reginald Barclay, played by Dwight Schultz. I actually first heard of Dwight Schultz from my high school classmate, John. John had a bit of an obsession with the actor. I don't really know why, but I think he might have just liked the name. He actually wrote a piece for a creative writing class that had a character named Dwight Schultz as a werewolf. It was a very weird story. I'll just leave it at that. I'm personally mixed about the depiction of a socially awkward and anxiety-ridden character in Hollow Pursuits. Barclay certainly possessed some traits that really resonated with me. I dread socializing with others. One method that has always helped me to cope is through imagination. I would often reenact conversations and situations in my head as a way to bolster my self-esteem. Moreover, I like to indulge in self-masturbatory fantasies where I've become an idealized version of myself, where I'm some great hero who can defeat anyone in a sword fight and have many handsome men at my beck and call. If holodeck technology existed, I'd certainly use it to live out daydreams of things I can't do in real life. However, Barclay had some traits I found to be quite cringeworthy. I consider myself to be a very punctual person, and I've never been late to work or a meeting because I was too busy fantasizing. I guess there just wouldn't be too much of a story if Barclay's holodeck habits weren't interfering with his work performance, but I did find the portrayal of an introverted character to be a bit too negative. I know that I'm probably at a disadvantage compared to those who have more outgoing personalities, but I don't think that I'm incompetent and completely ineffectual in the workplace. It's just very odd to me that someone like Barclay would have been able to graduate from Starfleet Academy without having been taught any techniques to help him deal with his social difficulties. And then, of course, there's his particular fetish of running simulations using the likenesses of his coworkers. I personally can't connect with that type of behavior. It's pretty strange and awkward to me. I can certainly understand the extremely negative reactions that the other crew members had when they came across his programs of them. Indeed. The only person on the ship who appeared to be somewhat sympathetic with Barclay's rather strange holodeck affliction was Geordi LaForge. Part of the reason probably was because he too had created and then subsequently fallen in love with a holodeck version of a living person in Dr. Leah Brahms in Booby Trap. I think the main differences between Barclay and LaForge's situations were that Brahms wasn't working on the Enterprise when LaForge made the program of her, and his initial intention wasn't for pleasure, but for a professional consultation. But of course, LaForge got taken to task when the real Brahms paid the Enterprise a visit in Galaxy's Child. Now, as an aside, I've always disliked the way that female scientists and doctors are often depicted on screen. The women are frequently attractive, young, and single. That has no, to use Rob's favorite word, verisimilitude. A doctorate takes about 5 years, longer if you choose to complete a master's first. Medical school takes 4 years, with an additional 3 to 7 years of residency required before you're eligible for a medical license. The numbers just don't add up. I can't believe that most of the women I've seen on screen are old enough to have gotten out of grad or med school, much less become renowned experts in their fields. And of course, the percentage of single women is just grossly inflated. While I don't have any actual statistics, I'd say the majority of people with doctorates I've encountered, male or female, are either married or at least in committed relationships. Film and television like to sacrifice realism for the sake of some sexual tension and drama, and I get that, but it is something that drives me nuts. All of this is to say that I do applaud Galaxy's Child for having some realism by revealing that Brahms was married, even though I don't understand why an intelligent and respectable guy like LaForge always seemed to have trouble finding dates, whereas Wesley gets a princess and Ashley Judd, but that's a topic for another day. The other thing that I really appreciated is the extremely negative initial reaction that Brahms had upon discovering LaForge's holodeck recreation of her, going so far as to say that she felt violated. It seemed like a realistic response that someone in her position would have. Booby Trap was told from LaForge's perspective, and when we see the story his way, his actions seem relatively innocent and understandable. However, from Brahms' point of view, this could be interpreted as being very creepy and a serious incursion on her privacy. Her reaction was similar to those from Riker and the other crew members when they came upon Barclay's programs of them. I think many people in their positions would probably find such an affair humiliating. What are the ethics of using technology like the holodeck to create real-life people? On one hand, I can understand the privacy issues it would cause, that many people would be disturbed by the idea of having their likenesses used without consent. On the other hand, people do frequently fantasize about each other, and that isn't really something that anyone can or should control. Even though it is often played as a recurring gag throughout The Next Generation, if you're a telepath like Laxwana Troy, you're going to be inundated with crude thoughts from coworkers. If a person keeps their stimulations to themselves and doesn't allow their habits to interfere with their work and professional relationships, I'm not sure if it's too far removed from personal fantasies. I'd certainly never create simulations of people that I actually know and interact with on a daily basis. However, I'd be lying if I said that I wouldn't want to use such technology to play out some of my /fiction fantasies. Of course. Why not? If the holodeck existed today and we were to judge people by the programs they run, we'd all be seen as creeps. Live long and prosper. Willow. Once again, Willow, a great letter, and I love that you chose to write me about Reginald Barclay and Hollow Pursuits and Galaxy's Child. Very interesting. But yeah, look, I agree with you. I mean, human beings are human beings. We're sexual beings. We're erotic. We're full of eroticism and that kind of thing, and I think we're already there. I mean, we have all kinds of technology now that you can fantasize with, and I mean, it wouldn't just be sexual. Obviously, we see Bashir and O'Brien go to places like the Alamo. I mean, I think one of the more interesting, if we had holographic technology right now, one of the things I would love to do is I would love to know what it's like to step foot on Mars. Like if Curiosity could be beaming back enough information that we could have holographic representations of the surface of another planet. I would love that, where you could actually walk around outside on Mars without a spacesuit. I'd love to see things like that. I would like to be able to, I mean, I wouldn't want to I think if we have that kind of technology in the future, aside from the obvious, I mean, obviously porn led the way for home entertainment technology, such as VCRs and DVDs and things like that. But it would also be interesting, like I would love to go visit, if I've never been to a city, have an entire holographic recreation of a city I've never been to, so you could walk through it and visit it if you could. Instead of having pictures from Google Earth, maybe they would have Google holograms, and they would go in and holographically create a day in the life of your favorite city, and you'd see all those people wandering to and fro in the cars, and I think that would be really great. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of that, and I don't think you can control that because we're human beings and we fantasize, and so it's going to happen. It's going to happen. One of my favorite science fiction novels I've read, and I keep talking about this book, but Peter Watts, his novel Blind Sight takes place, I think, in like the 2080s. And they talk a lot about how nobody even has sex with anybody else anymore. It's all robotics and all that kind of fantasization. But once again, Willow, a great letter. And for those of you who might not know, this show, Robservations, and the Burnettwork has a website you can see right below me there is the address, theburnettwork.net, and all of the letters that I read on the show appear there. And if you want to send me a letter that I'll read on the air, you can send it to me at the website. And also check out Willow Yang's. She has her own column, her own section, Willow Talk, which is good stuff. So yeah, have her yeah, that's what okay. Bunyan Snipe says it's Stoklasa. That's what I thought. My typing's getting worse. Thank you for correcting me. John Harrison sent in another super chat saying, Samuel on Trek Yards yells Khan whenever I send a super chat to them, but Into Darkness stole my name. I'm older than that movie, and I find it funny, though. Yeah, man, I just can't give Into Darkness any love. I think Star Trek Into Darkness is probably the worst written big-budget science fiction movie ever. Can't get behind it. I don't think it's good at all. Can I say that? Anyway, now I also look at other fans' work. I'm always constantly looking at other fans' work. And there was something, Nihilus Shadow on his DeviantArt page, or maybe her DeviantArt page, I'm not sure. Nihilus Shadow wrote an interesting piece. I wanted to share it with you guys. So why don't we do that? I've been seeing people defend the sudden change in the Federation's attitude as seen in Star Trek Picard because they see this as a natural progression after the Dominion War. Since the Federation had become complacent in the TNG era, they had been unprepared for the Dominion's aggression, and its subsequent militarization of the Federation changed how they view the galaxy. But does this make any sense based on what we've seen of the Federation before? This isn't the first time we've seen a more militarized Starfleet. The original Star Trek was set in a time when the Starfleet was militarized. James T. Kirk identified himself as a soldier, and they made it clear when the Klingons were introduced that the two powers were on the brink of war. Even the TMP era of films, it was established that Starfleet was the military. It would be in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, that we see the Federation shift its priorities from militarization to exploration. This isn't even remotely new. During the TOS era, the Federation had been in a Cold War with the Klingon Empire. Despite the Organians stepping in and preventing all-out war in 2267, we do know the two would sporadically fight each other. The hostilities between these two powers would last for almost 70 years, and despite this, the Federation did not abandon its principles. The incident which happened to the Romulans isn't too dissimilar to what happened to the Klingons. In 2293, the Klingon moon Praxis exploded and caused significant ecological damage to the planet Kronos. The Klingons were unprepared for this accident, and it was estimated that the Klingon Empire would collapse within 50 years' time. Many believed the dissolution of the Empire would make the Klingons the alien trash of the galaxy. Some in Starfleet believed the Klingons' safe haven in Federation space was suicidal, and the Klingons believed their culture would be forgotten if assimilated into the Federation. Despite these fears, the Klingons were willing to speak with and accept assistance from the Federation, and the Federation was willing to offer it. This ended nearly 70 years of hostility between the two peoples. I find it incredibly hard to believe that the Dominion War would cause the Federation to become so jaded when that conflict lasted only 2 years. If the Federation didn't succumb to such behavior after 7 decades of conflict, then why would they after 2 years? An entire generation grew up in a galaxy where the Klingons were the Federation's most hated enemy, but they were still able to sign a treaty with them, give them assistance after the ecological damage, and the Empire continued to survive and become long-lasting friends with their former enemy. It could be argued that the Dominion War was more devastating than the old Klingon conflict since the Federation was in danger of being conquered, but you have to remember that Star Trek Picard is set in the same timeline as Star Trek Discovery. According to Discovery, the Federation was nearly conquered by the Klingon Empire in 2257. They were so badly beaten that Starfleet had to make a final stand at Earth. A Klingon fleet entered the Sol system, the very heart of the Federation, and came into visual range of Earth. That was far more devastating than anything that happened during the Dominion War. True, the Breen actually attacked Earth, where the Klingons were called away before opening fire, but that was a sneak attack. The Federation was never pushed back to Earth by the Dominion and forced to make a final stand. Things were bad, but the Federation and its allies were able to push back against the Dominion and take the fight to Cardassia. So with Discovery continuity recognized by Picard, we have to take that into consideration when we recognize that the Federation was still able to set aside its differences and assist the Klingons to ensure the Empire could still stand. and yet somehow we're to believe with the war with the Dominion causes the Federation to become disillusioned to the point where they pretty much turn their backs on the Romulans, even though the Romulans were allies in the war and fought side by side the Federation against the Dominion. This makes no sense to me. Yet, yes, the Federation had trouble of its own with the synth attack, but the Federation Klingon peace talks didn't exactly go as planned either. Remember the assassination of the Klingon Chancellor, James Kirk's arrest and imprisonment, the space battle above the peace conference, and the attempted assassination of the Federation president? All that happened, and the Federation still helped the Klingons and ended up with peaceful relations with them. The Federation and the Romulans have a history of conflict, but in the last several decades, they had moved past that. They fought together in the war and after the incident with Shinzon. The Romulans were open to more peace talks. Captain Riker of the USS Titan was last seen going to meet with them to improve relations. Things were looking good the last time we saw the TNG crew. I cannot believe that the Dominion War would cause them, the Federation, to be so jaded to the point of isolationism. It's out of character for them, and it spits in the face of Gene Roddenberry's hopeful future. Well, I really like that, Nihilist Shadow. You and I definitely park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. But I agree with you. All of this is sound reasoning. But you've spent more time thinking about this than the writing staff of Star Trek Discovery, clearly. And I think that's kind of a bummer. Yeah. Stub McShave says, I kind of hoped Beetlejuice would go supernova. Unfortunately, it probably won't happen yet for some time. By the way, yesterday was a palindrome date, 02/02/2020. I heard that. I heard that yesterday was a palindrome date. What Stubble is talking about is the star Betelgeuse. Scientists have noted this is not science fiction, this is science fact, that the star Betelgeuse, which is a red giant, has been dimming, inexplicably dimming. Scientists have never seen this before. It's dimming. This is my favorite astronomy story that's going around, along with the stars that we are no longer seeing that did not go nova but have just disappeared. Did somebody build Dyson spheres around them? We don't know, but if you look up, there's been a couple articles written lately about stars that used to appear 100 years ago on star maps and star charts that have completely disappeared. Why is that? The universe is a strange and wonderful place. Anonymous tipped $3 and said, also, I thought that Picard's thoughts on science fiction were a petty jab at fans. Yeah, I unbelievable. It's unbelievable that, yes, they took a swipe at science fiction fans, which is unusual considering if you're going to bring a Star Trek, or not even a Star Trek novel, a great science fiction novel, you're going to invoke the great Isaac Asimov, you'd think that your writing would at least be on par with his. Unfortunately, it is not, by a long shot. So, yeah, it was pretty interesting, though, that was the case. Not a big fan. Just something, yet another in a long line of grievances I have against the second episode of Star Trek Picard. I am way backed up on letters, but I'm going to read one that's self-serving. Talking about ego. This John Hiroshi writes in to say, hi, Imagination Connoisseurs. I recently watched the movie Free Enterprise on Amazon Prime. If you're a Captain Kirk fan, Free Enterprise might be a favorite movie for you. The humor really worked for me. I went into it basically spoiler-free. I knew Robert Meyer Burnett co-wrote it and William Shatner appeared in it. I really enjoyed going in without spoilers, so I won't go into detail about the movie. I liked it so much, I even ordered a used copy of the Free Enterprise DVD, the 5-year Mission Edition, extended 2-disc set. I also ordered Her from 2013 and Encounter, directed by Paul Salamoff. While I liked Encounter, I really liked the Her Blu-ray. I hadn't heard much about Her. I guess it got awards for Best Original Screenplay. That's all I wanted to say. Sincerely yours, John H. Well, John, first of all, I'm very happy. First of all, I'm not happy that you first saw Free Enterprise on Amazon streaming because it's an old version. It's not my preferred version of the movie, but I'm very happy to hear that you bought the Anchor Bay 2006 5-year Mission Extended Edition version of the film. It's by far my preferred version of the movie. It's longer. It's got more Shatner in it, and it has a different sound mix and a better transfer. So, and it's in its original aspect ratio of 1:8:5 as opposed to 1:3:3, which drives me crazy. But I want to thank you for the kind words, and hopefully I'll be able to get Free Enterprise out in 4K in my definitive version at some point, because that would be great. I want to thank you for writing in. Ian Samuels, our man Ian Samuels, who is writing he does a Doctor Who column that's on the Burnettwork website. Check it out. He has written in about Picard. Rob, so here we are. Star Trek Picard has begun. Through a dream and then an interview, we get much of the post-Nemesis storyline. We start with Blue Skies gently playing. This is particularly significant as it is the song Data sings at Riker and Troy's wedding at the beginning of Star Trek Nemesis, and before begins singing it at the end, hinting Data's memories are beginning to integrate. It is good to see a line drawn between this and the 2009 Star Trek feature film, even though they have borrowed the Romulan sun-going supernova plot. In the Kelvin timeline, before fully integrates Data's data and becomes Data, he is then accepted back into Starfleet and is promoted, and Captain Data is the new commander of the Enterprise E. But in Star Trek Picard, before was just too basic to integrate Data's memories completely, meaning Data is dead and his sacrifice in Nemesis still has meaning. But after the attacks on Mars and the shipyard, synthetics have been banned by the Federation, just as they did after the Eugenics War. There was a huge death toll, and we don't know yet if that toll includes Geordi LaForge or not, since he was running the shipyards. So Starfleet chose to turn their back on the Romulans and Picard's plan to save them, which results in Picard resigning, claiming Starfleet was no longer the Starfleet he knew. Similar to his actions in the film Star Trek Insurrection, where he disagreed with Starfleet's raping of a planet of its minerals and not showing any concern about the inhabitants. We discover that Daj is Data's daughter, reflecting the episode The Offspring, where Data had attempted to build himself a daughter. We see in Picard's vault a model of his first command, the Stargazer, and also the Cousteau, the Captain Jot from the Enterprise E, also squashed in the background. You can just about see a model of the Enterprise E. Daj's attackers are revealed to be Romulans, Tal Shiar perhaps, but she is killed. This is what forces Picard to stop waiting to die and take action. He needs to find Daj's twin sister. She's revealed to be a scientist on a Romulan reclamation site, which, right at the end, is shown to be a Borg cube. Star Trek pilot episodes have notoriously been really bad. The Cage is not really bad. I think Cage is great. Encounter at Farpoint, The Caretaker, and Emissary. I think Emissary is great too, and I even like Caretaker. And you know what? Other than the Wolf 359 stuff, they were all pretty bad. I thought Emissary was a great pilot. Broken Bow, the Enterprise pilot, was the best of what came before, but was far from perfect. Star Trek Picard's pilot was great, and after the awful Star Trek Discovery, it was fantastic to have good Star Trek back. My wife and I love watching Star Trek Picard and both enjoyed it immensely, and will now make up our Friday night date night watching the new episode on Amazon Prime every week. Well, again, I think that's a good idea. I'm in. I am in. So this is another one. Here's another Picard. Somebody is responding to me. This comes from Rob Collins. Hi, Rob. Been listening to your podcast for some time, and I found it to be fun to listen to as well as insightful. Why, thank you. I've recently listened to your Star Trek Picard first impressions on Robservations, and I do disagree with you on a few things. First is the idea that Picard being at the Vineyard would not sit well with him, as it didn't with you. It's actually a great continuation of the character, given Picard's arc through the movies. Beginning with Star Trek Generations, where Picard is given the news that his brother and nephew were killed in a fire, he becomes much more preoccupied with the idea of family and a legacy than he did in the show. That's the planting of the seed which germinates a little bit in Star Trek First Contact and Star Trek Insurrection, but doesn't truly start to bud until Star Trek Nemesis when confronted with his clone Shinzon. This is where the resolve to take care of the Picard legacy is cemented. It would have been equally satisfying to see Picard on some archaeological dig with his retirement home still being the Vineyard. There's a kernel of Picard's archaeological interest with the mention of his writing of historical analysis, but I'll admit that's a bit of a stretch. Next would be the various technological inconsistencies that are currently perceived with this first episode. The primary example I believe you cite is the Black Ops soldiers transporting into Daj's apartment. It's true that she may have been transported out with a conventional transporter, but we're not clear on specifically what the objectives are of the soldiers beyond determining if Daj is activated yet, or from where these soldiers are coming from. We know their race, which you can spoil to the audience, if you wish, assuming you read this on air, but again, not specifically where they are coming from. It's inferred that they're trying to kidnap her, but we're not still clear on why. It's conceivable they may be too far away for a conventional transporter, and trying to beam Dodge away would not have been possible. We also know later that Dodge doesn't seem to appear on sensors, and that may also be what's interfering with her transporting out of the apartment. That is, of course, all speculation, but we have so few facts. But given the facts at hand, that's what I think is going on with the Dodge apartment assault situation. Third is the idea that the Federation would not become isolationist. There are a few directions to go with this, but I'll stick to two primary conversations. The first is the idea that the Federation as a whole could not possibly become what's described in the show, which is potentially turning down a humanitarian request and becoming more isolationist. We've seen examples of Federation citizens and Starfleet officers having xenophobic or authoritarian tendencies. Admiral Layton in Homefront and Paradise Lost, as well as Pascal Fullerton and He Was Without Sin from Star Trek Deep Space Nine for the authoritarian examples, with Chief O'Brien being our example of someone that had anti-Cardassian sentiments. But they all, all of those people had good reason for this, and they learned that they were wrong, ultimately. It's not a huge leap to assume that the average Federation citizen who's probably living at a high standard would see outside powers such as the Romulan Empire as looking to strip those comforts away due to the simple tribal thought of the other. I don't think so. The best real-world example to look to would be the United States and looking at where its national attitudes have gone over the past 20 years, which is coincidentally how much time has passed in the Star Trek universe between Star Trek Nemesis and the new show. The same kind of isolationist thoughts can be tracked and seem to have gained more ground during that 20-year period in both the Star Trek universe and the United States. The difference is that the Star Trek universe was already enlightened. They would not allow these kinds of things to happen. The other conversation is the idea that the Federation is supposed to be the highest moral authority depicted in the Star Trek universe, and to have the moral dilemmas be played out with alien cultures. The crew of the ship or the station, unencumbered by the weight of our world of chaos, serves as the window for us to view these conversations. You have, of course, cited many wonderful examples of these kind of episodes, and it's certainly where Star Trek excels. What appears to be unpalatable to some viewers is the idea that Paradise is all good and infallible, which is odd given the shades of gray that were shown make up the Federation and Starfleet during Star Trek DS9's run. The United Federation of Planets was very much painted as a galactic power that's interested in maintaining and expanding its influence in the galaxy. It's a federalist body that so far hasn't engaged in outright aggressive warfare, but it's far too simplistic to suggest that all members of the Federation have left behind ideas that could not potentially turn the Federation into a much more isolationist galactic power. See, I always felt that they were through that. In my version of Star Trek, Earth was through that. And while, yes, sometimes they have to react to external stimuli, they're also wise enough to know what will not lead them down the primrose path or that road to hell that is paved with good intentions. It may sound strange. The Federation, which is made up of many different planets and races, would become even more isolationist. But what has to be considered is that the Federation is a tribe, just as the Klingon Empire is a tribe, as the Cardassian Union is a tribe. The Romulan Empire, or what's left of it, Zethinkethi, the Dominion, and so on. If a tribe feels threatened, it will take steps to protect itself, never potentially be wrong. Whether those actions are rational or not. Star Trek is typically at its best when it's giving the audience a moral situation to ponder, and there are certainly parallels to consider in this first episode of Star Trek Picard, regardless of where a viewer sets his ideological loyalties. It's unfair to suggest that the Federation is above scrutiny and can never potentially be wrong. Well, both after what we saw in DS9 as well as from a perspective of Star Trek serving as an interactive commentary on the current culture, I can't help but think about what conversations may have come around in some living rooms, workplaces, or bars back in the 1960s when A Private Little War or Let That Be Your Last Battlefield aired and talked about prominent issues of the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. I think that the same sort of conversation is coming around now, just far more amplified due to the mass communication enabling of the internet. I won't, however, say that I, along with many others, I'm sure, don't feel a certain degree of trepidation about how Star Trek Picard will unfold since we're still dealing with J.J. Kurtzman Trek. I'm not a fan of the J.J. movies or of Star Trek Discovery for a variety of reasons. However, I'm willing to give Star Trek Picard a chance as it's trying to start out smarter than the other Star Trek installments we've received over the past 10 years. We're clearly on a season arc with Picard to which I can only hope that we see the galaxy of 2399 further expanded on so we can see the nuances of why things are the way they are and not just vague background exposition. Details matter. Thanks again for your work, and keep on keeping on. Well, Rob C., you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. I agree with you, but again, I think that by subverting the Federation and basically turning everybody into evil assholes, which is kind of what they've done, you remove something. You remove the hope that's there. Now there is the optimism, the inherent optimism that was built into the utopian ideals that Roddenberry espoused, that he showed in the future of Star Trek. Once you've gotten rid of those and you show that humanity, I mean, by this time the human civilization should be ever vigilant, guarding against these things. And I just felt it really unimaginative that this is the way they've chosen to go. It's too easy. Making something dystopian is hard. I mean, it's the easy way to go. It's hard to make something not dystopian. It really is. And to maintain that, because inherently people like stories that are set in dystopian areas because the conflict is constantly there. Although I am not, I'm just not a fan. That's one of the things about Star Trek. It is in fact the positivity that is part of Star Trek's appeal. I mean, it really is. And let's see. Here's another letter about Star Trek Picard. And this one comes from Enti Andy. E-N-T-I, Enti Andy. Dear Rob, I just watched the first episode of Star Trek Picard, and on first viewing I found it gripping, although on second viewing I had similar reactions to you about Star Trek Picard retreading old Star Trek beats instead of going on a mission to explore strange new possibilities, so to speak. But then I had a thought. From a certain point of view, it all makes perfect sense that issues like synthetic, the Borg, and the withdrawn Federation should all be part of the story, because this is part of the fabric of the universe being set up in previous Star Trek. After all, if Star Trek has taught us anything, it's that we live in a universe in which new life isn't always recognized as such, or if it is, it isn't recognized as equal. The Federation doesn't always live up to its ideals, does it? In fact, one could reasonably argue that it would have been odd if the world we presented in Star Trek Picard just a couple of decades after The Next Generation, where all these issues were presented to us, was one in which these themes were not present in some way or to some degree. Perhaps the problem isn't so much that these story beats are in Picard after all, rather the problem would be that if they were only story points in the series and the show also doesn't branch out to explore other issues. Well, I don't know if they will explore other issues. It looks like this is going to be a season-long arc dealing with Bruce Maddox and his rogue synthetic group that we've already seen a piece of. So we'll see where it all winds up. But again, I would hope your letter seems like it has more consideration about Star Trek than the writers. So yeah. Let's see. Back to this. Anonymous Tipped says, Rob, have you read the Night's Dawn series by Peter Hamilton? It's a huge, far-flung future, hard sci-fi space opera epic with a completely bonkers threat. It has also one of my favorite book titles of all time, The Reality Dysfunction. I just love that. Yes, I have read. I am a huge fan of Peter Hamilton, and I cannot, if you guys want to read a great series of books, read The Reality Dysfunction is great. The Night's Dawn series is great, and I have my Peter F. Hamilton up there next to William Gibson, but I can't see it because they're right behind the light that is shining into me. If you guys have not read Peter Hamilton, Peter Hamilton, as a matter of fact, he has a new series out that I have the first two books of, but I have not read. It's a first contact story, and I am looking forward to it. But yeah, good call on that. Peter Hamilton is one of our finest science fiction writers. Troy Ray sent in a super chat. Rob, the makers of New Trek can insult you all they want. We can make the choice to be offended. Don't give them that. Stay cheerful. Well, Troy, I think that's great advice. I absolutely think you're absolutely onto something. But because I love Star Trek my whole life, I have to talk about it. I can't not watch it. I think what's frustrating to me about modern Star Trek that we've received on the movie screens and on TV is there are so many great Star Trek stories that have been written in the novels. I'm a huge Star Trek novel fan. And before you talk about whether they're canonical or not, in my own head canon, when I'm reading great novels, like I've talked about Diane Duane, I've talked about the novels of David Mack a lot, the Reeve Stevens. If you want to read just two great Star Trek stories, if Generations left you unsatisfied, and you always dreamt of seeing the original series crew and the Next Generation crew interact, read Judith and Garfield Reeve Stevens' novel Federation. I mean, I know you might laugh at yourself, but the thing about whether you're and David Mack's Destiny trilogy with the Borg in it, or I talked about it earlier, his Cold Equations trilogy, or his Mirror Universe duology, when you read a great tie-in novel, when you read great Star Trek fiction, it's so well researched and so well done, and it's so lovingly. The people that are writing them they love the Star Trek universe, and what they do is they build on it, and it all feels, there's so much verisimilitude in the best of the Star Trek novels. Even a book that I would consider to be a Star Trek novel that I consider to be a romp, just a fun character when Spock actually basically becomes a space pirate. Sonny Cooper's book Black Fire there's more good Star Trek in these books than I've seen in the last 10 years of Star Trek. And although I find it interesting, clearly now that Kirsten Beyer, an actual Star Trek novelist, is writing on Picard, and indeed based on Brian Fuller's original conception of the show and her ideas, she is listed as co-creator, but I just don't think that she would ever be given the respect she probably deserves. But the writing staff is clearly going back and borrowing concepts from at least David Mack's book. I mean, he wrote a Section 31 novel called Control. Come on. And there's a lot about his Cold Equations trilogy is all about the Soong androids. And there's a lot in those books and Kirsten is a friend of his. So it's kind of strange. But yeah, I mean, it's not that they're insulting me. It's just sad when there are great Star Trek stories that could be adapted. That's what bugs me the most is why not just adapt one of these books? They're there. Take them. I mean, anybody who's ever read David Mack's Destiny trilogy would be like, well, there's a show. That's what Picard should be. I mean, go adapt the Destiny trilogy. Actually, I don't even know what happens at the end of Picard, but the first season, but maybe the Borg show up. Just go adapt the books. Sean M. sent a very generous super chat in. Thank you, Sean M. I think the Federation can be evil or uncaring and can certainly screw up. How often was the Enterprise the only ship in the quadrant? This is certainly incompetence. How far is it to isolationism from that? Well, the one thing about Star Trek is that there were so many checks and balances. The whole point was that even when someone like Admiral Layton during Homefront and Paradise Lost from Deep Space Nine was shown to be wrong. And those tendencies, whether an admiral was crazy or was doing something he shouldn't have been doing, Bob Gutton's character, Ben Maxwell in The Wounded, they go after him and he's obviously taken the war into his own hands. He doesn't like the Cardassians, but it's revealed at the end that he was correct. Even though his methods were not very sound, he was murdering Cardassians, but they were violating the treaty. And that's those kinds of things happen. Sean M. also goes on and sends another chat. Thank you very much for supporting the channel. Although I ultimately agree Star Trek should be more hopeful than not. It's not Star Trek otherwise. Yeah, and people are going to say, well, Jean-Luc Picard, he's the one that makes it all hopeful. Yeah, but they've got a million different things going on. You've got Romulans in a Borg cube. You've got synthetics blowing up Mars, and apparently Mars is still on fire. How does that work? I don't know. And then you've got Starfleet admirals insulting Picard. I mean, it's a much craziness out there, people. Craziness. And I don't know if I dig it. I don't know. Actually, I know I don't dig it. Where is is there any positivity going on? And I don't know. I guess we'll see. I'll keep watching. You know, it's funny. Everybody always says, they're always like, Rob, why do you keep watching if you don't like the show? Because it's Star Trek. It is Star Trek, and I watch, and I will watch. I'll continue to watch, even if it does piss me off. And it is pissing me off. I'll tell you something. When they show us in the episode, and a lot of people have commented on this already, when Picard gets to Starfleet headquarters, he looks up and you see a holographic representation of the Enterprise and the Enterprise D. Now, the Enterprise D is the Enterprise D that we all know and love from Star Trek The Next Generation, but the Enterprise, the original Enterprise, is the Discovery version of the Enterprise. And I'm like, I look at that and I'm thinking to myself, well, how does that work? I mean, you had the canonical Starship Enterprise. Obviously, it was in Deep Space Nine, but it was also on relics. They get on the bridge of the Enterprise, the canonical, the one true Enterprise, on relics. And yet in this show, Picard, they don't give us the Enterprise. And it's weird. I mean, it's like this mixing and matching of things. And I don't understand. Why show us the Enterprise D from Next Generation that looks like the D, but then show us an Enterprise from Star Trek Discovery, which is not canonical? It's strange to me. I look at these things and I'm like, what does all of this mean? Sean Pullen says, I agree that hatred of AI is illogical, but so is racism. And yet racist peoples and societies persist. Is it such a stretch that Romulan xenophobia could exist to AI, especially if there's historical precedents? Well, yes. Yes, I think technologically it makes no sense at all. Especially, they didn't just say they don't like AI. I mean, after all, AI is constructed. It's fabricated. It was built by somebody. And as we now already have AIs and they're permeating I don't believe a technologically advanced society could grow if you're not dealing with these issues. These issues are going to exist. And when you say that, the Romulans are very xenophobic. Yes, xenophobia exists. And this hatred of AIs is a ham-fisted, ridiculous commentary on racism. I get all of that, and I don't disagree with you. I think absolutely racism is illogical, especially if you've traveled anywhere. It's a very odd thing to me that people are racists against people of other colors. I've always thought it was strange. I never have understood it, especially if you travel to other parts of the world and you see, like, you go to Asia, and if you were to travel through, I was in South Korea last year, or you were able to go to China or Vietnam or Cambodia or anywhere through Asia, you realize, to be say prejudiced against Asian people is sort of silly, because in that part of the world you're the minority, and it's just bizarre. If anything, why not be prejudiced against somebody's culture rather than them as whatever color they are? But I think it's all so stupid. I mean, racism I've always thought is pretty dumb anyway. But I mean, I get it. But if you're going to do an allegory like this, the idea that AI is somehow something to be shunned and that they're prejudiced against it, it's weird. I just don't think it works. I don't think any technologically advanced society with computers that run your starships, that being prejudiced against AI is weird. It's just, I don't believe in it. I don't believe it. But, is there historical precedence? Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. It's like, look, if synthetics were hacked indeed, and that's why they attacked the Utopia Planitia shipyards, it's not the synthetics' fault. It's the bad actor who did that. And so we'll see. I mean, maybe Bruce Maddox is behind it all, which is sort of a strange thing. And again, I hope they get the same actor to come back and play him, because that would be badass. Timbula the Spider Monkey says, I'm still writing a letter about my feelings and attachment to Star Trek, but it's turning into a monster. I might have to break it up into two parts. What got me into it, my feelings about old Trek, and my disillusionment with post-Bad Robot, the post-Bad Robot era. Well, I would love to see that. Oops, sorry, I'm skewing I screwed up there. I would please send it in as two letters. I would love that, Tim. Send it in. Automata sent in a super chat and says, maybe the synthetics were just helping the Federation to discover a perpetual energy source in the form of the ever-burning Mars. Well, that could be. To me, it's such a weird, they have these concepts like Mars is still on fire. Like, really? Because you attacked a base of operations, a shipbuilding yard, and Mars is still on fire? I mean, all that stuff, it's just weird. Like, they do these kinds of things in modern Star Trek and that don't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. And they bother me. I'm not going to lie. They bother me. Yeah, but what are you going to do? I guess we all have to live with it, don't we? We can live with it, can't we? We can live with it. Anyway, I think I'm going to bring the show to an end today because I have so much work I have to do. I've got so much I have to catch up on. But I want to thank you for being here. I'm a little rusty, I got to say. Got to get back into the swing of things. But I want to thank everybody for coming back to the show. It's great to have you all here. And if you want to send letters to me, I'm going to get to all your letters if you sent them in and I haven't read them yet. There's been a lot that have come in when I'm gone, and I'm going to try and get to all of them. But go to the Burnettwork.net website, send me a letter. Thanks for supporting the channel via whether it's super chats or whether it's tipping. I very much appreciate that. I want to thank my moderating staff, starting with the great Mayor Mike Bodden, Mayor of Riverdale, Iowa, and then, of course, our retired detective Jim Boyers. And then, of course, we have the great Greg Smith, who we've seen some of our moderators have seen some of his work on his life-size snowspeeder he's building for the Emerald City Comic Con, so it's great to have him. And, of course, our newest moderators, both Jordy Lyons and Louis Yu. Thank you both for being here. Thank you all for being here and making Robservations the place that it is. So that's it. This is the end of Robservations. I cannot believe I just did episode 330 or 300, the 300th episode, and now I just did episode 329 going to 330. Well, that's crazy. By the way, I made a video with Roberto Suarez up in Portland. I'll play that tomorrow. I've got to transfer it off my phone and convert it. Please, if you want to send videos and see your videos on this show, I want to play them. So send me videos, and always remember, do it horizontally, not vertically. Use the Horizon format, and if you can, shoot movie files or MP4 files or any of those things. But I want to thank you all for being here. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say, of course, as I bring this one to an end, I would say, as always, have a better day. And I'll see you tomorrow on the John Campy Show and back here at 1 o'clock for another scintillating episode of Robservations, the show about something.